Hi everyone, welcome to Talking Mental Health with me, Joe. Today I am joined by Lauren, who is the following. Lauren's a mental health advocate in Manchester. She's part of UK YoungMinds Advisory Board. She's a youth worker, the founder of Youth Mental Health Matters. She sits on Plan UK's Youth Advisory Panel, and she's also part of Be Vocal Choir in Manchester, which is a mental health choir raising awareness of mental health in Manchester. How are you, Lauren?
Hi, I'm good, thanks.
Good, good. I've gone through everything there. Is there anything that I missed off that you want to add on to that list?
Yeah, no. So I do a lot of work in mental health, but I guess kind of through those roles, I sit on a couple of other boards. So I sit on the Children and Young People's Mental Health Board in Manchester, which is kind of a group of professionals that are in charge of kind of overseeing and planning the strategic side of the mental health support in Manchester. And I kind of sit on there providing youth voice. And then I guess the other stuff that I'm involved with recently is the suicide prevention stuff. So I've been involved in Trafford, my local authorities, suicide prevention stuff, but also the Greater Manchester campaign Shine a Light on Suicide. So I've just been doing some work with them, kind of raising awareness and trying to create kind of youth voice in that sector.
Very busy for such a young person.
Yeah, no, definitely busy, but no, it's good. I enjoy it and it helps. So yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So what was the reason you kind of got involved with either one or all of those different projects?
I guess so when I was younger, I was on a board called Trafford Youth Cabinet, and it was kind of a youth parliament board. So it led into youth parliament. I was on that from when I was about 11, and it was about kind of local issues and kind of creating youth voice in them. And one of the big subjects that always came up was mental health. And then when I was about 15, I started struggling, and I also picked up that a lot of my friends were struggling. So I went to an all-girls grammar school, and I think for me, more of my friends had mental health problems than didn't. And kind of it was very normalised at our school, but there was also no education around it. So it was kind of everything's different for each person. So I noticed like one friend would go and speak to a teacher and they'd get a different experience of getting help or receiving support. And I was like, fair, and it was kind of the procedure would be. Then when I was 16, I got elected as member of youth parliament for Trafford, which meant that I kind of represented Trafford and kind of had to take on a campaign point. And for me, it was kind of easy. So I started work on kind of a project, which I guess has now grown into Mental Health Matters. But it was about creating more education and more of a kind of youth voice within schools about mental health, and kind of making sure that there was definitely some structure in place when a young person went and reached out for help. So one of the big things that I was on was a lot of my friends felt that they were kind of passed from teacher to teacher, or if they went to a teacher to speak to them, but they weren't deemed the right person, then they were told like, you have to speak to your head of year or you have to speak to the pastoral care. And kind of they picked out that teacher because they were comfortable speaking to them. So I did a lot of work with my own school and created kind of a charter that the school kind of signed up to. So it was kind of like a pledge to say like, we'll work with young people. And they kind of started a group of young people who were mental health wellbeing ambassadors in the school. So they went and kind of delivered assemblies and created education resources for lessons, but also worked on like the strategic of like how mental health support would be received in the school. And then other schools picked up on it, and I went to some of the local schools around me and started kind of doing work with them because they wanted to have youth voice around theirs. So I kind of worked with the pupils in that school so that they could make it specific to their school. And that kind of led to what I do now. So it kind of grew into Youth Mental Health Matters. And then from that, I kind of reached out to loads of different people across Manchester and was invited to sit on boards. So a lot of it stemmed from the youth parliament side, and kind of the skills that I picked up from that then led me to kind of run my own campaign, which kind of grew. And because it was something I was so passionate about and so many of my friends and family had kind of struggled with it, I wanted to make a difference and kind of put a lot of energy and resources into being able to do that. It's a long story to explain, but yeah, it started off as a project in my school and grew, and now the charity works in schools to do what we did in educating and giving pupils a voice, help the schools set that up. And then we also run conferences which multiple schools come to, and we have speakers. Obviously we haven't been able to do them recently, but that's normally an annual thing we do. And then fundraising, and then kind of anything that we get kind of asked to do across Manchester to provide youth voice. So we do a lot of work with CAMS Digital, a mental health research team in Manchester. And then recently we've done quite a bit with the Shine a Light on Society. But yeah.
Lost you for half a second there, but I think you got through most of it. So I guess your experience in school in terms of mental health support wasn't great.
No, so I think the school thought the support they had was really good, and everyone that you talk to would disagree. Being an all-girls school and a grammar school, it was a very competitive environment, which didn't really help. And I think when I've spoken about it before, I've said, like, at school it kind of felt things like skipping lunch or little things like that, that if you look into it more deeply aren't normal, were very normalised. So like a lot of body comparison and body image stuff, but also self-harm and depression and anxiety, like, or panic attacks, like you could witness it very frequently. So it became kind of a culture that other people were really struggling, and it was difficult to kind of break out of that sometimes. What we did have was we had a really good citizenship teacher and PSHE teacher who was the kind of lead on everything that side, and she came when I was in year 10, and to this day I always said, like, she is the reason that I spoke up about my mental health. She is the reason that a lot of my friends spoke up about mental health, and kind of how we started to make the change was because she was just so passionate about ensuring people's voice was there, but also ensuring well-being was the #1 priority. And I think before, the school had been a little bit of an exam factory, kind of getting the results and off you go. And it was nice that we did witness some changes, but I do have friends that are still there, and it's not great still, but there has been improvements, and I think that's kind of mirrors society. Like, things are slowly improving, but it is very kind of slow. And yeah, so the work that I do is kind of trying to speed that up a little bit, but also you do sometimes get knockbacks when you realise that things are still kind of similar. Like, I left school 4 years ago, and it has changed, but it is also still the culture that I've kind of described of it being normal to be struggling is still there, I think.
And is that the sort of culture at the school? Is that just because of exams, or is it just the kind of culture that existed throughout the whole school, that because it is a grammar school, everyone's competing to be the best?
I think it's a mix of things. I think the grammar school probably adds to it. The fact that it was an all-girls school, I always think that was kind of, especially with the body image and the eating disorder side. But also I think there was a lack of education and lack of understanding about it. And I think that's mirrored in every school across the UK. Like, when I first started struggling, I didn't actually know what was happening, because I'd never heard of mental health, and I hadn't ever heard that kind of that was a thing that could happen. And for me, kind of, it was my cousin that spoke to me about how she was struggling. And then I realised, like, oh, maybe this is something to speak to someone about. So I went to that the citizenship teacher. And then from there, like, we did start having the odd lesson, but it wasn't until year 10, which I think is a little bit late, so 15, 16. By then, a lot of people have already started struggling or know someone that struggled. And I think especially now with COVID, it will be a complete different story. I think young people are going to have felt a lot more mental health effects maybe earlier on. So I think it's definitely something really important for schools to think about kind of increasing.
Yeah. I think the education in school was and is generally quite poor. I think it is getting better, like you said, but I think in terms of the amount of education that people get, mental health is probably a tiny percentage of that. And I think for someone like yourself, who you didn't even realize you were struggling until somebody I guess you said your cousin, did they see it in you, or was it just something that they kind of had a conversation with and you kind of felt it as it was being?
They were struggling themselves, so they texted me about that, and then I kind of picked up on the thought, like realised, I think I went to my teacher about my cousin, and then through talking to them kind of realised and was more educated about everything else that was happening.
Yeah. And what was that moment
But
like?
yeah, like you said, like it is such a tiny percentage, and I always get people that kind of ask me, but how do you expect schools to educate on that? Like, they don't have time, they've got so much other things to do. But I think it's about finding the right balance of things that are important. There's no point having all this education and good like grades and stuff if you yourself are struggling and can't continue to kind of perform or do well. And I think it's one of those things that it can be put into every lesson. It doesn't need to specifically be like a lesson on mental health. And like little things, just teachers picking up on things, or the culture of the school, like I said earlier, just kind of having that at the front of their mind, teachers, I think, when they're speaking to pupils and kind of checking in more often. It's definitely something they could do a lot easier.
Yeah, that's a really valid point you mentioned about, you said before about, the school was a bit of an exam factory, and what good is it sending students out with A's or nines as it is now if their mental health is poor and they're struggling?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, super interesting. So I was going to ask you, what was that moment like for you when you sort of realised that actually I am struggling a little bit here? Did you know where to go and what to do, or was it kind of like not really sure?
Yeah, I think, like I said, like I just went to that teacher, and luckily for me, that teacher was really educated and kind of knew the next steps and how to help me and like point me in the right direction. And that teacher was someone that, like, throughout my time at high school, I kept going back to and like checking in with, and she checked in with me, and I learned a lot from them, and they also kind of supported me through kind of getting the right support. So for me, I was really lucky to have that person. But I think the reason that I did so much work on it as well was, what if that teacher hadn't been there? What if? And in a lot of schools, they won't have a citizenship teacher or PSHE teacher, or they might not have a teacher that's educated in the support or where to go. So when we do education in schools, as much as it is about educating the pupils, the teachers sometimes need just as much education. And then it's difficult for them because they've kind of been thrown into this position and being told, like, you've got to get good exam results, you've got to support them with this and this. They've not actually, a lot of the time, had any mental health training. And often it's the teachers that have to seek that out themselves. So I think it's definitely something that should maybe be a bit more compulsory in teacher training and other society training, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. So when you guys go into schools and do the mental health training with the students, what kind of stuff are you doing with them? Is it workshops? Is it one-to-one work? Is it a little bit of both?
So it's all workshop based, really. It kind of depends on what the school does. So a lot of the schools that we go to do kind of drop down citizenship days. So they're days that are focused on a specific theme, and it'll be for a year group. So we normally arrange like different speakers and different topics, or if the school have like a specific thing, they'll let us know. And then we'll talk, but we'll also do a workshop, and we'll allow the pupils to kind of open up. But also we like to make sure that we leave them with something that can continue. So we try and set up wellbeing ambassadors so that they can then use what they've learned to go into the other year groups and help educate them, but also work with the staff. So we've done quite a lot of staff training meetings, and some of that's just about pupils sharing their stories of how it felt, and kind of giving them the real life thing. Like, I think what I always say, like, statistics are great, but you don't get the real life feel. You don't understand like how many people that each statistic. So we have like little top tip cards that are all created by young people. So although I kind of head the charity, behind me there's 25 young people that sit on a board for us and like do work. So any kind of resources I need, I'll like throw it out to them, and everything will be written by young people, which is a really unique thing, I think, that we do. And it's because for me, the whole point is it's meant to be the young person's voice, and it's meant to be the young person that's experienced it that's educating. Because what's the point in getting someone that doesn't understand or hasn't been through it themselves? even now, like, I'm conscious that because I'm a bit older, it will have changed. So I always make sure that everything I do, I go and check back with the kids that are still in school and still experiencing kind of those things. So yeah, it's a mixture of things. And I think because of Corona, we haven't managed to do as much as we'd like to this year. Schools are pretty impossible to get into at the moment because they're just so busy. But yeah, one of the main things is definitely the conference, because we normally have between 10 and 15 secondary schools there who'll bring about 10 of their pupils, and it'll just be kind of a day long worth of training and workshops and different experiences that they can then use to take back and teach their other friends and peers, really.
Yeah, that's amazing. I just wanted to ask, when you go into a school and you're, as a young person, teaching the teachers, how is that generally received? Because obviously the teachers are used to being the ones doing the teaching. How do they receive that from a younger person?
To be fair, I think a lot of them enjoy it because it's something different. And I think it, like I said, it makes it really hit home. I think for me, when I did it at my own school, it was really strange. At the time, I was kind of still at sixth form, and I was telling them kind of all the problems that I'd had through the school, and like certain teachers hadn't dealt with it well, and they were sat in the room, so it was a bit awkward. But now, going into another school isn't so bad. But yeah, I like empowering the young people there to then speak to their teachers. And I think from some of the schools we've been to, they do invite um, so yeah, it's received quite well, and I think teachers enjoy it because it's something different. It's not the same that they always get, like sat there being talked at. I know we do kind of workshop and like try and do interactive things as well, so that you can kind of get both points of view, which is good.
What was that balance like for you, doing this sort of mental health training yourself, and then balancing that with exams and revision and sixth form, and I guess into university? How did you kind of juggle everything at the same time?
I think I've always been someone that's kind of a really busy person. And then for me, like, it's a bit strange, but I like timetable everything. So for me, it's about making sure like this stuff is the stuff and the stuff makes a difference. But obviously my exams were important, and then I also rode, so it was about making sure kind of that I had enough time to do them, but also then have like the rest and social. And I think a lot of the time I did get it wrong, and it took a long time for me to learn from it. So like now I'm a youth worker, and I work for Youth Focus Northwest, which is the charity that ran the UK Youth Parliament that I was involved in when I was younger. And it's really interesting now looking back and seeing kind of the young people that are in the position that I was, and being able to advise them like, yeah, it's so great that you're doing all this amazing stuff, but also you do need to take time for yourself. And I think that's one thing that a lot of mental health activists, I'm sure you found it yourself, kind of, you're always working so hard to do it, and sometimes you do burn out. And I think it's become a new culture actually that I've seen recently of like taking like mental health time for mental health activists. I know a couple of my friends that I've met through kind of Twitter and stuff have done some work on it, and it's really interesting to see like that people are picking up on this. So like when I was younger, everyone would just invite me to everything, and I was really bad at saying no, so I just be constantly going from like meeting to meeting, trying to revise them the way and whatever. Whereas now it is that kind of important culture of being able to say no, and knowing that's not going to mean that the work you're doing isn't important or isn't going to go further. It's just understanding that some opportunities you have to say no to, which is hard, especially at the beginning when like if you're trying to get into like campaigning and activism, you just want to say yes to everything to get all those connections. But also it's kind of saying, no, I can't do that now. Can we do it then or whatever? Just making sure that there's the right balance. But also I think one of my best friends I met through Twitter, and she does a lot of activism work as well. Just kind of checking in with each other and being like, do you not think you're doing a bit much here or doing that? Like, that's really important. But also someone that understands, like, so like my parents looking in were like, why are you doing all this? Why are you doing so much? Like, they didn't understand that for me, that was what kind of kept me going and kept me ticking. Whereas someone that's like had been through it themselves, like it's good to kind of bounce that back off each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what is your way of switching off? How do you, when you've got that bit of time to yourself, and I guess it's different this year because of lockdown and stuff, but when you were super busy, or at the moment when you do say no, how do you make sure that you actually get time to look after yourself?
So I think, like I said, I'm really rubbish at doing nothing. I can't just kind of lie there and do nothing. So for me, rowing, I've done since I was about 14. But I always said, like, just being out on the water was like my time. Like, you're in a boat by yourself, that's all to think about. But then obviously that gets competitive and you're training a lot, so it's not always as peaceful and as time for yourself as you like. I read a lot, but I'm also one of those people that once I start a book, I can't finish it. So I get really, like, I'll just stay up and finish it. So yeah, I think music is a big thing, and just watching Netflix, really, you know, kind of the basic, but just kind of, it allows you to kind of switch off for a minute, and or however long you need, watch a series, watch an episode, or yeah.
Yeah,
They're the basic things that yeah, it's never never going to be perfect, but just making sure as well. Like, I think I got to the point, and my friends picked up on it sixth form, like I was doing so much other stuff that I never saw my friends, and I did lose friends from that because they just didn't understand, like, you're doing this, you're cancelling on us, like, why are you doing this? So I think for me, it was about making sure that I balanced kind of seeing friends or spending time with friends as well, and kind of having that normal teenage life, I guess. Like, yeah, you're doing all this great work, but also you are still a teenager. You are also, like, meant to be going out, having fun, spending time with your friends, and like, that's not a bad thing. And I think a lot of people will go on Twitter and they'll see all these activists constantly doing work, or constantly working, or creating podcasts, or creating a blog, or just constantly doing stuff, and they don't see the other side of it, that actually some days they do just go and spend time with their friends or go sit with their family, and that's perfectly okay and needed.
Yeah. Did I had a question and it's just completely fallen out. Oh yeah, that was going to ask you. With lockdown happening this year, how did life change for you? Because I assume from what you said, you were very busy going out into schools and, you know, doing youth meetings and stuff like that. And, you know, obviously everything stopped in March. How did you adjust to this year?
It took me a while at first. I think the first month I hated not having stuff to do, and at that point I was living at home, and I think I drove my family mad because I couldn't sit still. So I just but luckily for me, youth work went online, so I was still working. So I worked 4 days a week for Youth Focus. So for me, like, all our meetings went to Zoom meetings, so I was still able to do that. And with Youth Mental Health Matters meetings, we went on to Zoom. Like, it wasn't as good, but it was something. And then I got furloughed for a month, and at the start of the month I absolutely hated it because I was like, have nothing to do, there's no structure. So I think I wrote, like, I think it was 5 or 6 different things that I wanted to kind of do every week. And I think one was like write a blog post, one was like reach out to a friend and check in on how they're doing. But also, like, by the end of that month, I actually really enjoyed having more time for myself. Like I said, I think it was the first time that I'd, like, stopped. So it was nice as well being able to spend time with my family and speak to friends and kind of not feel guilty that I should be doing and doing and doing. And I think from that, it's made me reflect more on kind of the balance that we spoke about and kind of ensuring that was there. So yeah, things did change, and we found it difficult with Youth Mental Health Matters because a lot of what we do does rely to pupils in schools. So we've kind of focused more on social media and trying to reach out via that. But yeah, it's been a difficult change, but I think that's for everyone.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of becoming the new normal.
Yeah, it's not a nice normal, is it? It's very different to what it used to be. But I guess, like you said, everyone's had to adjust to it in some way, shape, or form. So now everyone just kind of rolls with it as best they can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, you tweeted something recently about you'd reached out for mental health support. I think it was back in October, and you were told that the wait was about a year. What,
Yeah.
what was that like, hearing that, you know, for a young person who needs that support, and then it's like, yeah, you can get it this time next year?
Yeah, I think, as horrible it is to say, it didn't surprise me because of everything that I'd, like, seen through all the work I do and, like, hearing from friends. But it did kind of make me sit back and think, I think I had a day of being like, why do I do all this? What's the point if it's not changed? Like, the one thing that people need is support. And we have so many campaigns like, it's okay to talk, reach out to do this, like, it's okay to not be okay. And I got really angry for a while, and I rang my friend who was an activist, and I was like, why do we do all this? What's the point in telling people to talk and reach out for help if when they do, there is no help there? And it did kind of throw me back and be like, we've been doing this for years and it's still a year-long waiting list. Like, it's not gone down. In fact, it's probably gone up. But then also she spun it and said, well, if it's a year-long waiting list, think how many young people out there that are on that will then find the work that you're doing, and that will keep them going until they get onto the waiting list. And I think just kind of hearing that after my day of being like, what's the point? It then motivated me more to kind of want to write stuff for young people that are out there on waiting lists, because there'll be hundreds and thousands of people out there on waiting lists just waiting for that support and not knowing what to do. And I think for me, like, I'm in a lucky position that I have so many people around me and connections that I can speak to them, and I could get through a year-long waiting list pretty easily. But for other people, like, especially if it's like the first time they've reached out for support, it's going to feel like you've hit a wall and there's nothing else there. And I think that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about looking at now, is how people that then are on that waiting list can access resources such as like looking at these, or reading blogs, or seeing people that have been through it themselves and know that, yeah, okay, it is a year long, but there is like a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not, you're going to be in darkness for a year. There's little bits that can help and you can use to support yourself in the meantime. But also, like, it just kind of highlighted the importance of doing it, like the importance of working and sitting on all the board meetings and I don't understand, or sitting there for hours listening to these big words and being like, what is going on? Like, importance of like just sitting there and being like, actually, yeah, but have you thought about it? Did you know, like, young people are waiting a year? And being there and like reminding those professionals, like I said, like, they know the numbers and the statistics, but for them, like, until they hear the stories, it's not very real. And one of the things I did recently through my job, so Youth Focus run alongside with 42nd Street, the charity in Manchester, they run a group called Be Heard. So it's a group of young people who work with the Children and Young People's Board to kind of give youth voice. And we've been running it for about a year, and it always works. Like, we do the topic, we write a newsletter and we give it to the board. And then the young people said, it's great that we're having a say and we're doing this, but I don't feel like the board fully understand why our views are so important. So we planned kind of a symposium, that's what they called it. It was basically like a little Zoom meeting, and the young people made it all themselves, and it was an hour and a half, and it was just the young people kind of reminding them the importance of our voices and our stories, and why actually they sit and get this youth voice. And it was so well received, and I think the professionals really enjoyed it, and it actually brought it to life for them. And they said, we sit in all these board meetings and we get all these pieces of paper, but really it doesn't bring it to life. And then they heard from people that were on the waiting list and what that felt like, and they heard from people that had gone through different things. And like you said, bringing the conversation out there, yeah, okay, sometimes you might be able to talk and then you won't get help, but actually by reminding people what it's like, they're going to work harder to improve that faster and kind of make that waiting list shorter.
Yeah, I think that's so important, isn't it? When people who are making these big decisions actually hear from the people who the decisions affect, because I'm not sure if it's YoungMinds or YoungMinds UK on Twitter, the slogan is for decisions about us, without us. And I think that happens so often, where people in a position of a decision maker can make a decision and not really make the best decision for the people that that decision affects in the long run. So that symposium that you guys had, I think things like that are so important, because then the professionals are hearing the voices of the young people that are going through these struggles.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that's one of the things I've never been enjoyed the tell your story for the sake of telling your story, if you know what I mean. So like, tell your story so it can make a change. Don't tell you, like, I always get really annoyed when like a professional will be like, can you come to a meeting and tell your story? And I'm like, yeah, but if I'm telling my story, I want that to have an impact. I don't want to sit there and kind of tell you my story of like how I was affected by everything. I want to then work with you to improve it for future people. And I think that's always kind of been my ethos. Like, I've always been, yeah, it's great to talk, but something has to come out of it. And I think the same with like media opportunities and media things. Like, we see so many articles published about like, this young person has been through this, and like just sharing the story, which is great, and it does bring awareness, but also there needs to be something more. There needs to be, and now this is what we're going to help do about it, or this is how we're going to try and use this to change things, rather than kind of just being not a sob story, but just kind of, you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. Yeah, having that impact of this is my story and this is how I want it to change something for the future, rather than just this is my story. Thanks very much, and away you
Yeah,
go. No, completely makes sense, and I think that's important. I think it's important for, especially for people like yourself and others who have had mental health struggles, and understand what it is that people are going through, to say, okay, this is what I went through, and this is how I dealt with it, or this is how I am currently dealing with it, and this is how I advise you to deal with it, rather than just going in, telling your story, and then leaving them thinking, well, what happened after?
yeah.
I think that is important. It completely makes sense. One thing I did want to ask you, I can't remember if you tweeted this or you wrote a blog about it a while ago. You experienced a friend who committed suicide, and I don't want to talk about the actual suicide itself, but just how did that have an effect on you as a young person who knew that your friend had taken their own life?
Yeah, I think so. It was one of my friends from Be Vocal Choir that we spoke about earlier. And it was really difficult at first, and I felt kind of hopeless and like not guilty, but a little bit guilty of like, what could I have done more? Like, I knew she was struggling, and I knew she reached out for help, and she was getting a lot of help. And she was also like me, she did a lot of mental health advocacy across Greater Manchester. So for me, it was a bit like she was helping so many people, and no one stopped and kind of helped her. And it was really difficult at first, but then I kind of used it to empower me to go on and like speak about that. So I think beforehand I'd always spoke about mental health, and I'd been really happy kind of helping. And then suicide was something that was still, even as in the mental health advocacy work, it's still like a bit of a taboo subject. Like, it's harder for people to speak about, and like even telling your story, if you're like, I was touched by this or whatever, like people seem more shocked by that. So for me, it kind of encouraged me to then be like, okay, well, I'm going into these schools, and actually a lot of schools don't want to speak about it, because they think by speaking about it, you're going to encourage young people that this is like an option, which is completely not true. So I kind of used that to say, actually, then I'm going to try and change this and try and make the conversation on it, because the numbers are that a lot of people will experience someone committing suicide within their family or friendship group, and it should be something that can be spoken about. And I think for me, then I reached out to Adele Owen, who's the Greater Manchester suicide prevention lead, and was like, how can I help? What can I do? One of the first things I did was work with them on their Shine a Light on Suicide campaign, which is a brilliant campaign. And they've got a website which has a 20-minute training session that anyone can do, just about how to help someone if they're in that position. And one of the things that they reiterate that talking about suicide isn't going to make someone commit suicide. And it was just so important. It kind of strikes the nail on the head, like going into schools and telling young people about it. Like, yeah, it's a horrible subject, and yeah, it's a sad subject, but it's not something that we should hide away from. It still needs to be talked about as much as anything else. So yeah, and now I kind of do a lot of work with the Shine a Light on Suicide campaign. Like I said, one of the very first things I ended up doing was going to Park Life, which was the strangest experience, because you have all these young people at Park Life, and we're stood there in Shine a Light on Suicide t-shirts trying to raise awareness, and it was tipping it down with rain. It was horrible, and I was like, these people don't care about this right now. But actually, even if one person had picked up that leaflet and had heard about it, then it's made a difference. And I think just the presence of it being there and being at events like that is so important for young people to actually realise that, yeah, this can affect us. Like, it is. And we did have a couple of people come up, and like, you don't think a festival is the right place. And a lot of people were like, why on earth did you do it at a festival? But the amount of young people that will have just seen the name that day, and maybe a couple of weeks later Googled it to find out more, would have had like a great impact. So yeah, I've done a few different things with them. They do a month of hope in September for suicide awareness, and they do different events, poetry events and stuff like that. So I think it's just encouraged me to get involved with more and kind of remember her in that way, by kind of using it to raise awareness and encourage conversation, make sure that other young people understand that they can talk about it, and by talking about it, you're not going to encourage it. And I think that's something that, especially going back to the education, like, a lot of teachers think the same. If I talk about it to a pupil, I'm going to give them ideas. And I recently did this suicide prevention first aid training, and like, that was the one thing, like, it's such a myth. And yeah.
Fantastic. So you've turned that into something that you can help support people with, like you were saying before with your story. You know, you've used that tragedy to kind of raise awareness of the issue and open up the conversation about it more than just, okay, we need to push that further into the darkness. We need to shine a light on it, and we need to let people know that the conversation can happen. It doesn't necessarily lead to an action.
Yeah, definitely.
So important. So what does the future look like for you, Lauren? What's your vision going forward with Youth Mental Health Minds and with Young Minds? And you know, what do you want to be doing in the next 5 to 10 years to change mental health awareness?
Big question. So I'm planning on going back to university to do journalism. Very different, but I hope that through that I can continue to raise awareness in more of a positive way. I know the media always kind of spun out as like the dark side and the dark people in terms of mental health, but I've done quite a lot of work with ITV Granada that's been really positive, and I hope kind of using my career I can continue to do stuff like this. Like, I think youth mental health matters will be something that I'll always be doing, and hopefully can continue to do if we can get funding. And yeah, and it's always been kind of, it's not my job and I've never got any money from it and I never want to, but it is something that I do want to continue, even if that's having kind of social media accounts and sharing stuff just from that. Yes, I just hopefully want to keep it going, keep it growing, get more young people involved so that they feel that they can make a difference in their schools, and support them to do that. Kind of as I grow like out of the young person category, make sure that youth voice isn't forgotten about. So like on the boards that I sit on, get another young person to replace me, and work with them so that kind of they do understand it and they feel like they are making a difference.
Fantastic. So you have got a vision, even though it is through journalism, it's still opening the conversation and raising awareness. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for taking the time today, and being so open and honest.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And all the work you're doing is amazing. Don't let it go underestimated. You know,
Thank you.
probably sometimes feel like you're going nowhere with it, but it does get noticed. And I'm sure a lot of young people out there have seen what you're doing and may not tell you about it, but I'm sure it's having an effect on a lot of people. So keep doing all the amazing stuff you're doing, and hopefully we'll speak to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lauren. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.